I'm joined by a panel of women working on sustainable finance issues in the EU. Arlene McCarthy is our special advisor to Bloomberg's chairman and founder and former legislator who worked on financial reporting in the EU. Emma Jane Joyce is head of responsible investment with the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, an €8 billion sovereign development fund having a direct ability to move markets towards sustainable investments. And finally, Alice Steenland is the chief sustainability officer at Dassault Systèmes, a TCFD member and French CAC 40 company. So thank you all for joining us today. Arlene, let me just start with you. Why is Bloomberg so focused on the issue of this sustainability reporting?
Thank you, Francine, and it's great to be with all these women. I mean, I guess people ask me often what my job is. What does it mean to be a special advisor? And I say, well, I'm very lucky to work for somebody very special, actually. Michael Bloomberg, our founder and founder of LP and founder of Bloomberg Philanthropies, because he has a long-standing commitment to sustainability and climate action. It means very much that sustainability is hardwired into the DNA of the company. It's into the ecosystem of everything we do as a business, in our corporate philanthropy. And I think we're trying to continually raise the bar, practically. So last month, for example, Bloomberg announced a commitment to net zero emissions by 2025. So we did that by signing up to the business ambition 1.5 degrees commitment. That's been put forward by the UN, and we mean business. And then we also complemented that over the last years with a renewable energy target, RE100, where we're set to reach 100% renewable energy by 2025. And again, I think can I just say, though, because I think it's an important message, Francine, to give to business, that we've recognised enormous value by doing that in terms of saving money for the company. We've saved since 2008 through our environmental and sustainable approach. We've saved $120 million in costs and operating costs. So it really is it's a enlightened business, as well as a sustainability drive that is driving us to do that. And then I think the second point, which I think is really important in terms of our of the others that have joined the panel with Emma and Alice, is that I think we're all living now in this environment post-pandemic with the upheaval, resource scarcity. We're still seeing the impacts of climate change. And I think, we decided externally to go out using, of course, Mike Bloomberg's roles as UN Special Envoy in climate action, to really build coalitions of business leaders to begin to provide guidance to help business understand and manage their financial risk, to help them look at reporting frameworks and structures. Because we could see, and we did that with the TCFD. We launched TCFD, in fact, at UN COP in Paris in 2015. Then we did that with Mark Carney when Mike took on the chair. We've been supporting Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, SASB, since 2010-11. So it's always been there for us. But what we've now seen as a big change is there is a growing demand and appetite from investors for, I think, as the Minister said, comparable, consistent, coherent and material data that can be used by the investor community really now to make smart, sustainable investment decisions. And again, if I can just share, Francine, because if I talk to our experts internally, I think the statistics are really quite overwhelming at the moment. If you look at, we all thought that in the COVID crisis, we've seen maybe investors deprioritizing sustainability. In fact, we've seen the opposite. We've now seen an investor preference for sustainable assets, for sustainable funds. We've seen a rebalancing of portfolios towards sustainable assets, more of a focus on resilience. And so we've seen, for example, ESG assets have gathered momentum in 2020, a 15% growth. And if we keep going at that rate, ESG assets will actually be they've climbed to more than a third to a projected 140.5 trillion global by 2025. That's enormous. If we look at ESG ETFs, here we've seen flows of $89 billion in 2020, again a 3 times increase on 2019 levels. And I think we've also seen on ESG bonds and loan sales, we've reached a record of $746 billion in 2020, 32% higher than 2019. Now, I don't think this is a passing phenomenon. I think we're really now in this sustainability phase where everyone's looking to that. Companies are doing more in it. Investors want more of this information. And I think for us, reporting, disclosure, transparency is the absolute bedrock of that. If we don't get that right, then we're not creating a sustainable and green future, and we're not going to get the investments coming in.
Emma, do you see the same as Arlene was just explaining, that, do you want to do more? And actually, I know your fund is also part of this One Planet Sovereign Wealth Funds group. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you became a member?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Francine, for the invitation to join you today. So just briefly about the fund, you mentioned it's 8 billion of assets under management, and we invest in Ireland in a manner that is, I suppose, sustainable, committed to sustainability and responsible investment. And we actually have a mandate to generate not just commercial return, but also economic impact in Ireland. And even more recently, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, what we have done is established a 2 billion pandemic stabilisation and recovery fund to invest in Irish businesses, impacted by COVID-19. So, but I suppose as we move out of this maybe crisis mode over the last year that was so much focused on sustainability, and looking forward to, as Arlene has mentioned, this sort of sustainable recovery going forward, it's just, so important that climate is a key part of that, of those considerations. So while we very much have an Irish mandate, we see climate as, it is a global challenge that will be addressed by global solutions. And as a sovereign fund, it's very important to us to be connected with other like-minded investors and, to be able to share our experiences and to learn from those. So the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund initiative was established in December 2017 by the French President Macron. And really the purpose was to bring sovereign wealth funds together, to have them working together to accelerate their efforts to invest in a manner that is supportive of this transition to a low carbon economy that we need to achieve so urgently, and also to address investment risks associated with climate change across, the entirety of our portfolios. Sovereign wealth funds own significant portions, are significant investors across the global economy, and the overall health of our portfolios is dependent on the overall health of the economy at large. The framework, established in 2017, published a sort of a framework of key principles in 2018, and the members have been working together to implement those, and they're around alignment, active ownership, and integration. And we have been looking probably closely at this initiative for a little while, and actually in January of last year, what I didn't realise at the time was going to be my last trip off the island. I joined the working group as an observer in Paris last January, and it was so evident to me that there was so much different work going on at the different sovereign wealth funds, each of them bringing their own perspective of how they were addressing both climate risks and the opportunities around climate change as well. But the cooperation, the power, I suppose, of the cooperation and collaboration of sovereign wealth funds, working together really sort of accelerates, I think, the power of the asset owners to affect real change. But this is obviously a critical issue, not just for our fund, but for all the sovereign wealth funds.
Thank you so much, Emma Jane. Alice, as the Chief Sustainability Officer of such a big company, how are you engaged on sustainability reporting, and what are your key priorities for 2021?
Oh, yes, thank you. I'd also just like to say something, because Sylvie very kindly early on thanked the corporate sector. And I have been working in this space for a very long time, previously with doing Chief Sustainability Officer at AXA at a time when we were very involved in the creation of the TCFD, in the inquiry into the greening of the financial system, which gave birth to the network of central banks. And I am just so proud to be on this call, and so proud to see not only these women talking about this, but also how far we have come collectively on this topic. And also to thank Sylvie, and to thank France, because I have done most of my career here in France, and am so privileged to have been working on these topics when France has demonstrated such leadership in this space. So I would like to thank Sylvie and thank France in exchange for her comments earlier. In terms of what we are doing at Dassault Systems, so we are a software company, and we are very active both on the, as all large listed companies are, on all of these different reporting frameworks, be it TCFD or SASB, some of the ones that were mentioned earlier. We are working very much now on the taxonomy. So what does a green product mean for software, I think is a really challenging intellectual question, but also really fundamental to this new financial market we're entering into. So that is taking up a lot of our time. We are, I think, you mentioned also, some of the things about the corporate reporting and the advantages of that. And I would just say, I think Olivier mentioned, what you don't measure, what you don't manage, what you don't measure, you don't manage, which is a very common thing we hear. I think when you look at the cycle of how these things work, moving from reporting to action, you often go through the same pattern. So you have civil society and NGOs focusing on a topic. You have a third-party independent body who will start a reporting disclosure exercise around it. You will have a few voluntary leaders in the corporate sector starting to report. Then that reporting framework will become a regulatory requirement. And at some point, actually, in fact, after the reporting requirements, you end up with regulation and legislation for the whole market on the content of that reporting. So be it, diversity and inclusion or climate or what have you. So what's interesting from a corporate perspective is being in that game early. I think Olivia mentioned the advantage of that also. The more you participate in this process, the more you are ready for where it is going. And I think that's what enlightened corporates have known for a long time. So it's not just about the reporting. It's about where we're going as an economy.
Thank you so much. Arlene, if we go back to something that really you had a very emboldened and impassioned explanation of what we've seen. Do you think that pandemic even accelerates it? And if you see an acceleration of people wanting to change and report, is it specific industries or is it across the board?
Well, I think the first point is that, no one predicted that the next financial crisis or turbulence in the markets would come from a pandemic, from a health crisis. And that is, as Sylvie said, very central to the whole sustainability agenda, and particularly to what we need to be doing more of on ESG reporting and transparency. I think we all thought, and those of us who work in the finance sector were looking at where the risks were building up, and we thought those risks really were things like the shadow banking system, like we had in 2008. What were the financial products that were going to create to tip us over the edge? And that was not the case. So I think that's why there has been much more of a focus on sustainability. And I think there's been much more of a focus on all of the elements of ESG. And I think that, what we need to do now really is to, and I think the Minister said this very clearly, we have to probably step up now in terms of ensuring that, because financial markets are global, that we have to step up now in making sure that we create standards that hit the 4 points that I think are important, which is they need to be coherent, they need to be material in terms of financial risk, they need to be comparable and consistent so investors can make sense of them. I think there are some companies who already, have, in a sense, understood that they're enlightened businesses. They understand, one, that if they do this, they probably have a better chance really in the markets of getting investors to focus on them and invest in them as a business that is forward thinking. But I think also that if they don't do that, in a sense, my prediction will be that this will become a regulatory risk issue for them, a compliance risk, because I think we will see more rules and regulations from legislators, from regulators around mandatory reporting. And so in the end, they're going to have to get there anyway. Best to get on board now, learn the process, make it easier and make it less costly.
Emma Jane, what are some of the things that you've put in place actually to really deal with climate change risks? What are some of the concrete things that maybe others can take away from?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Francine. So obviously, as a sort of a long-term strategic investor, climate presents both an investment opportunity and, a systemic risk to the portfolio and assets. I think Mark Carney described it as, climate really as the mother of all risks. And as a fund, what we're focused on doing is ensuring that, both the whole portfolio, our third-party managers, our investee companies in which we're directly invested in, are really considering both the risks that climate poses to them and also potentially opportunities, and to ensure that we're capturing those in the right ways across our own decision making and our portfolio management. And I suppose we try to do this, across the whole of the fund, and we use sort of 3 key tools, perhaps. And in my role as the sort of head of sustainability and responsible investment, I'm very focused in kind of addressing the risks, I suppose. So the first is around exclusions and understanding really what we don't invest in. And Ireland, you may know, is subject to, or the fund, the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, is subject to the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act, which was enacted in December 2018 by the Irish Parliament. And this fossil fuel legislation made Ireland, I believe, one of the first countries, or certainly the ISIP to be one of the first sovereign wealth funds, to essentially withdraw public money from its investment in fossil fuels. And we, I suppose, monitor this on an ongoing basis. We've established a list of 242 companies, which is publicly available on our website, in which we will not invest I suppose, the assets of the fund in. So that's maybe the first way, which is about, I suppose, avoiding some of the risks. The second piece is really around the importance of active ownership. Again, this is something that has been the backbone of our approach to sustainability and responsible investment for many years, and is one of the key principles around the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund framework as well. We are a large state investor. We're a steward of public assets, and we want to be an active owner of those investments. So we want to use our equity shareholding or our debt exposure, to influence and to realise, material change, where particularly on a range of ESG issues, but in terms of climate, we're very focused on ensuring that we have good information, that there is sufficient disclosure from companies, and also that those, I suppose, those companies' strategies, they're thinking about their own preparedness for a low carbon future, and being on the right side of that, of those changes that are inevitable as we transition over the next number of years. And maybe then the third key tool we use is integration, which I think almost captures nearly everything else, and it's a mixture of sort of broad portfolio analytics to be able to understand where the climate risks lie within our portfolio, which assets, which sectors are most exposed, and also to use that information and translate it back into our own decision making. We've developed a suite of, I suppose, carbon analytic tools. In particular, we've great information across our global investments generally, but there's always room for improvement. This is an area that is continuously evolving. We've talked about the need for standards, comparable data, been able to, have data that's usable as well, which is very important to us to be able to fully integrate it into our investment decisions. And on the Irish side, I've talked a little bit about maybe our exposure on the global side, but on the Irish side, we've developed a suite of tools really to be able to model the best practice we see in global markets and ensure that that's translated into our Irish portfolios as well, in terms of modelling emissions, understanding carbon risk, on a pre-investment basis as well as on a post-investment basis. So they're kind of the 3 key risks, or the 3 key methods, I suppose, that I try to use to manage and mitigate climate risks. But, we've talked a lot about risk, but just quickly on the opportunity side as well, obviously, sovereign funds have huge potential to affect positive change and to invest in a positive way, in terms of having, I suppose, a more positive climate impact. And we do have a climate strategy that is very aligned with the Irish government's climate action plan, and I suppose ambition for Ireland to become a net zero carbon economy. And we've invested about 365 million to a range of different companies to date, across renewable energy, forestry, energy efficiency, a range of different companies that I suppose are trying to tackle climate from different angles. And, that's very much part of the solution from our perspective as well.
Thank you so much. Alice, when you look at, the strategy for Desso System, what are the new strategies, or what are the things that you're planning for the future?
I think, well, like many, like Arlene and Imogen have mentioned, there's both the risk side and the opportunity side. So I think, one thing we're doing already is we are starting to report on the climate impact of the software itself, which is something not many software companies globally are doing. So speaking to the importance of reporting, we feel like it's a good exercise for us to try to estimate as best as we can, even though not all the data is available, what that looks like, and understand that is a risk. And so software, a lot of people think that, technology is going to to be green, but it has, like any other industry, it has its own consequences. So we want to understand those, but we really feel like there's just a huge opportunity in front of us. So what Deso Systems does is makes virtual twins. So you can basically imagine completely new manufacturing processes or new products or new materials in a virtual environment. You can develop them, you can test them, so that you can essentially put things on the market much faster. And so when we're talking about disruptive, sustainable innovation, if we're talking about we only have 10 years, I think the earlier speakers were very clear about that. We only have 10 years really to transform. These types of tools are extremely useful. So what we're trying to do on the opportunity side is really build in climate knowledge, life cycle analysis knowledge into the way we build software so that everyone using that can redesign everything they're doing to try to reduce their own climate risk. And that's sort of what we're really excited about right now.
Arlene, what do you see in the future of sustainable reporting? What's next?
Well, I think we're going to see a very strong focus still on this, and I think the companies that have a focus on sustainability in terms of their own internal, organization are probably better positioned to weather adversity, whether that be from a global health pandemic or whether it's continuing climate change. I think they're better placed, as Alice just said, to attract capital investment if they're addressing those risks. And I think the bottom line for me would be that we cannot not afford not to focus on sustainability. It's the only way we're going to build resilience and build back now in terms of recovery from the pandemic and build a greener recovery. And so the trend is very clear. I think regulators are going to be more engaged in this. I think standard setters are already bringing forward ideas, rules, standards, whether it's the EC, IOSCO or IFRS. And so I think we're going to continue to be in this environment of change, and we've got to keep up this change by making sure that we develop the right kind of systems to enable companies to meet those challenges, to deliver good sustainability reporting, to help investors make smart, climate smart and smart green investments in the future.
Well, thank you all for a great conversation. Arlene McCarthy, Emma Jane Joyce, and Alice Steenland. And with that, we wish everyone a fabulous day. And of course, you can keep on checking EU policies because I know the team have some great events coming up. Have a great day, everyone.